The M2 Browning .50 caliber machine gun, affectionately known as Deuce, is an icon of American military might, renowned for its devastating firepower and legendary reliability. While its battlefield performance seems almost infallible, the story of its near-perfect operation isn't about a single crazy idea from one engineer, but is a testament to a deeper design philosophy. The tale begins with the genius of John Moses Browning, who, in the final days of World War I, laid the foundation for the M2. However, its true power lay not just in its initial design. Decades before World War II, critical improvements from engineers like Dr. Samuel G. Green at the Springfield Armory transformed it into an incredibly versatile weapons system. They perfected a design that allowed the gun to be easily configured to feed from the left or the right side, enabling its seamless integration into everything from fighter planes to tanks. The true crazy idea wasn't a single fix, but the weapon's core philosophy itself: simplicity, durability, and absolute power. It was built to endure the harshest conditions, a doctrine of durability prioritized above all else. This engineering doctrine would soon face its most brutal test. To truly understand why Deuce became an immortal legend, we must travel to the snow-covered forests of the Ardennes in the winter of 1944, where a theory of engineering was about to be proven in the crucible of battle. In the pre-dawn darkness of December 16, 1944, the Ardennes forest was meant to be a ghost front, a quiet sector for exhausted American divisions to rest, and for green units to acclimate to the war. But under the dense, snow-laden firs, 3 German armies had massed in secret for Hitler's final, desperate gamble: Operation Wacht am Rhein. The objective was audacious: to punch through the thinly held American lines, seize the Meuse River crossings, and capture the vital port of Antwerp, thereby splitting the Allied forces and forcing a negotiated peace. The offensive hinged on speed, surprise, and the brutal weather that kept the Allies' greatest advantage, their air power, grounded. On paper, the matchup was a nightmare for the U.S. Army. Elite SS Panzer divisions, spearheaded by the monstrous Tiger II heavy tank, faced overstretched American infantry. The German plan assumed that the initial shock would shatter the thinly spread defenders of the U.S. V and the 8 Corps, whose positions were considered too strategically insignificant to heavily fortify. The German High Command's theory was simple: American fighting spirit was brittle, a product of material superiority. Take that away, hit them with overwhelming local force, and they would break. The first sign of the offensive wasn't a bugle call, but a low, earth-shaking rumble that vibrated through the frozen ground. For the GIs of the 106th Infantry Division, huddled in their foxholes in the Schnee Eifel, it was a sound that defied comprehension. Moments later, the world erupted in the flash and roar of 1,000 artillery pieces. Amid the chaos, a new sound emerged, a fast, violent ripping noise like linen being torn at an impossible speed. It was the signature of the German MG42, a machine gun capable of firing over 1,200 rounds per minute. Its sheer volume of fire was a weapon in itself, designed to terrorize and suppress. Against this terrifying onslaught stood a starkly different philosophy of engineering, embodied in the heavy black form of the M2 Browning .50 caliber machine gun. It was no nimble buzzsaw. The M2 was a sledgehammer, its rate of fire a comparatively slow 150 rounds per minute. The German weapon was a marvel of sophisticated stamping and precision parts. The American gun was a product of forged, overbuilt steel, designed for a different kind of war. As German infantry advanced behind the curtain of fire, the American theory of warfare was about to be tested. The Germans possessed tactical surprise and, in many cases, superior armor. The Americans, however, held an invisible advantage not accounted for in any battle plan: a deep-seated institutional belief in rugged, simple, and above all, reliable tools of war. An American NCO, bracing his men as the first gray-clad figures appeared through the swirling snow, might have slapped the solid receiver of his heavy gun. "Long as Deuce keeps talking," a sergeant might mutter to a nervous private, "we're in this fight." The Germans believed they were attacking an army. They would soon discover they were attacking an industrial doctrine, and its proving ground would be the ice-bound Ardennes. The theory of industrial doctrine found its brutal classroom in countless isolated pockets of resistance across the Ardennes. At a nameless crossroads near St. Veth, a handful of engineers from the 28th Infantry Division had established a hasty roadblock. Their primary asset was a single M2 Browning, dug in behind a felled oak tree, its heavy barrel pointing down a snow-dusted lane. The air was frigid, hovering near 5 degrees Fahrenheit, 15°C, a temperature that made steel brittle and lubricants viscous. This cold was an impartial arbiter of mechanical design, and it was about to deliver a harsh lesson. When the attack came, it was textbook German Stoßtrupp Taktik. A squad-sized element of Volksgrenadiers materialized from the tree line, their advance covered by the hammering of an MG42. The sound was unnerving, a high-frequency shriek that seemed to saw through the air itself. The American engineers kept their heads down as a storm of 7.92 cm rounds shredded the bark from their cover. The German gun fired in long, profligate bursts. Its doctrine centered on overwhelming psychological shock and fire saturation. Across the line, an American private remembered thinking, "You could hear our 50 talking, but you could only feel theirs." Then, the American gunner responded. He didn't spray. He fired in controlled 3 to 5 round bursts. Thump, thump, thump. Each report was a deep, resonant bass note, a stark contrast to the MG42's frantic tenor. Each muzzle flash illuminated a 50 BMG tracer as it drew a deliberate glowing line through the gloom, reaching out with an authority the smaller German round could not match. One of these heavy projectiles could punch through the thin armor of the half-track supporting the German advance, a feat impossible for the MG42. As the firefight intensified, the cold began its work. The MG42's high rate of fire was a product of a complex roller-locked short recoil action, a marvel of engineering that required tight tolerances. In the biting cold, with lubricants thickening to sludge, those tolerances became a liability. The German gun crew was suddenly forced to stop firing, struggling with a stuck bolt or a feeding stoppage. In the ensuing silence, the M2's methodical rhythm became the only sound. The German gun was fast, but in this cold, it was proving temperamental. The American gun was slow, but it was certain. This scene repeated itself in hamlets and on ridgelines across the front. The M2 Browning, with its generous internal clearances and brutally simple short recoil action, was simply less affected by the conditions. It had been designed by John Browning with a farmer's appreciation for machinery that had to work no matter the weather. Its parts had room to expand, contract, and function even when fouled by carbon or thickened oil. This wasn't an accident, it was a design philosophy. The invisible advantage was now becoming painfully visible to the German soldiers, who found their premier infantry weapon failing at the decisive moment, undone not by American bullets, but by the cold and a competing theory of what makes a weapon truly superior. The ultimate test of men and machine came in the frozen, shattered ring around the Belgian town of Bastogne. By Christmas 1944, the paratroopers of the 101st Airborne Division were completely surrounded, low on ammunition, food, and medical supplies, but defiantly holding the critical crossroads. The German command, infuriated by this stubborn American island in their sea of armor, resolved to crush it. The climax arrived with the gray light of Christmas Day, when elements of the Panzerlehr Division launched an all-out assault against the western perimeter. Here, the core conflict axis, American rugged reliability versus German specialized sophistication, reached its violent apex. The German attack was a textbook display of combined arms. Panzer IV and Panther tanks advanced ponderously, their cannons spitting flame, while infantry swarmed behind armored half-tracks. For the defenders of the 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment, the situation was dire. Their 57mm anti-tank guns were few, and the effective range of a bazooka against a Panther's frontal armor was perilously short. In this crucible, the M2 Browning was forced into a role its designers had likely never envisioned as primary. It became their frontline anti-armor weapon. From a hastily dug-in position overlooking a gentle, snow-covered slope, a 3-man M2 crew watched the assault unfold. A German Sorry KFZ, 251 half-track, bristling with infantry, churned towards them. The gunner, a corporal from Ohio, traversed the heavy weapon, took a deep breath, and squeezed the butterfly triggers. The M2 bucked, spitting a stream of 50 caliber armor-piercing incendiary API rounds. The rounds weren't meant to take on a Panther, but the 10mm of steel on a half-track was a different matter. Bright sparks flashed against the vehicle's flank as the heavy tungsten core projectiles punched through. Smoke suddenly billowed from the engine compartment, and the half-track slewed to a halt, panicked infantry spilling from its rear doors directly into the interlocking fields of fire from other American positions. This was the M2's hidden genius, the culmination of its crazy design philosophy. It wasn't just a machine gun, it was a multi-purpose defensive tool. Its power was not just in suppressing infantry, but in breaking the synergy of a combined arms attack. It could force tank commanders to button up, blinding them by peppering their vision slits. It could chew through the thin skin of support vehicles. It could annihilate infantry squads caught in the open. A German tanker later recalled, "The American .50 caliber was a terror. It could not kill our tanks, but it could blind them and strip them of their infantry, leaving them alone." As the assault faltered, the M2 crews became the linchpins of the defense. While the German MG42s laid down terrifying but ultimately suppressive fire, the American .50s were actively dismantling the attack, piece by piece. The Germans had faster-firing guns and heavier tanks. The Americans had a single weapon system that was just powerful enough, just reliable enough, and just versatile enough to counter them all. The perimeter at Bastogne held not just because of the paratroopers' grit, but because it was a perimeter forged in cold, unbreakable American steel. When the skies over the Ardennes finally cleared on December 26th, the Allied air forces swarmed the skies, and the tide of the battle turned irrevocably. The German spearheads, bled white by fierce resistance in places like Bastogne and St. Vith, ran out of fuel, ammunition, and momentum. The Great Offensive collapsed, a testament to the resilience of the American soldier and the materiel that supported him. In the after-action reports and the cold calculus of ordnance evaluation, a clear lesson emerged. In the crucible of high-intensity combat, absolute reliability trumped theoretical performance. The legend of the M2 Browning was cemented in that frozen forest, but its origin story was far more deliberate than a single battlefield revelation. The crazy idea, implied in its near unstoppable performance, wasn't a last-minute fix from a lone engineer during the war. It was the core philosophy embedded in the weapon decades earlier by its creator, John Moses Browning. His genius was a profound understanding of mechanical simplicity. He designed the M2 not for a laboratory, but for the muddy, frozen, and unforgiving reality of the battlefield. The so-called crazy idea was to build a machine gun with loose tolerances and overbuilt parts that would function when caked in grime and serviced by a tired soldier with numb fingers. It was a doctrine of durability. This foundational brilliance was magnified by a less dramatic but equally crucial innovation from Dr. Samuel G. Green of the Springfield Armory before the war. Green developed a single, universal receiver for the M2. With a few simple part swaps, the same gun could be configured to feed from the left or the right, cooled by air or by water, and fired by a thumb trigger or a solenoid. This engineering decision was a logistical masterpiece. It meant the M2 that armed a P-47 Thunderbolt was fundamentally the same gun mounted on a Sherman tank or dug in with an infantry platoon. The logistical and training simplicity this provided was a massive, if unsung, strategic advantage. The legacy of this design philosophy is written in the decades of service that followed. While the technically brilliant MG42 was a wartime expedient, a product of Germany's need to mass-produce a sophisticated weapon with limited resources, the M2 was built to last. It served as the principal heavy machine gun for the United States in Korea, Vietnam, the Persian Gulf, and continues its service into the 21st century. The same weapon that stopped German half-tracks in 1944 is still mounted on American armored vehicles today. An old Army ordnance chief once remarked, "We'll stop using the M2 about 100 years after the last soldier who used it is gone." The ultimate proof of its design was not just that it refused to jam in the coldest battle of the war, but that it has refused to become obsolete in the century that followed.